The New Jersey Devils are trying to get healthy and find some consistency in what has been an up and down season so far. Trey Matthews of Locked On New Jersey Devils is here to talk about that and their prospects for getting back on track, coming up next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Devils, Trey Matthews. And Trey, hope you had a great Thanksgiving weekend. A little up and down so far for the Devils, but a lot of reasons for that. What has been the biggest issue with this team's inconsistency so far this year?
Well, I think the big thing has just been health. They've never really been fully healthy. So they finally got their two superstar players back recently, with them being Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier, but still out. You got people like Timo Meier, Tomas Nosek. We're still unsure about Eric Haula. He got dinged up in the previous matchup. Curtis Lazar did not suit up in the previous matchup either. So the Devils are still trying to work their way back to getting fully healthy, but getting Nico Hischier back, that was obviously a big momentum shift for them, because now you could start to build that structure of a better system around the superstar players of Jack Hughes and also Nico Hischier. That's what Lindy Ruff said in his post-game press conference last night at the conclusion of the 7-2 victory that the Devils had against the Buffalo Sabres. So I was credentialed the previous two matchups for the Devils, the first being against the Columbus Blue Jackets and the second one being the Sabres. And the difference of just how they played was night and day. So against the Blue Jackets, it seemed like that was one of their rock bottoms for them. It was back-to-back outings in which they came out lackadaisical, no heart, and it just seemed like they gave up on themselves as the game progressed. And then in the matchup against the Sabres, getting Nico Hischier back, that was just a different shift of energy, and that's exactly what they needed. They played better offensively, they played better defensively, and the Devils make it back to the playoffs. You're going to look at that game as the pinnacle moment, the turning point in which they were able to get themselves out of the gutter and turn their season around relatively early.
Emotionally, how big of an impact does the return of these two key players have on this team?
Well, with Nico, when it was announced that he was going to be returning, you just heard the cheers at the Prudential Center. And once again, it seemed like the team just played with a better sense of purpose. It seemed like they had much more confidence in them. And I had the chance to speak with Tyler Toffoli, Alexander Holtz, Jonas Siegenthaler, and Lindy Ruff postgame last night. And it was quite evident that, yeah, when Nico returned onto the rink, it seemed like there was more passion, there was more confidence, and there was just a different swagger about the Devils team. And then you get someone like Brendan Smith. He went after Connor Clifton, albeit it wasn't a standard traditional NHL fight. They were both assessed roughing minors because no punches were thrown. It was just Brendan Smith tackling Clifton onto the ground, because here's the thing. Smith was getting payback for Clifton for injuring Nico Hischier in the first place a few weeks ago, because Clifton had a dirty cross check to the head on Nico, which sidelined him for 11 games. And that's when the Devils really started to struggle. So Clifton got his comeuppance, and he knew it was coming. And he actually faced repercussions from the league after his cross check on Nico. And I'm just glad that, once again, Brendan Smith, he was sticking up for his teammate, because he knew that Clifton had it coming. And you talk about just the difference of outcome for the team and how they played. Trust me, that's not speculation. All the players confirmed it. Just having Nico back into the lineup was a huge difference maker for the Devils.
As far as the remaining injured players are concerned, do you have a rough timetable for their returns?
Unfortunately, I do not. Lindy said post-game that he's going to get a better assessment on a player like Timo Meier on Monday. Same with Eric Haula, who played just under 10 minutes in the game against the Sabres. We don't know what his injury situation is looking like. Same with Curtis Lazar. He tried to toughen through the Columbus Blue Jackets game, but he ended up just sitting the rest of the way as the game progressed, and he was scratched in the game against the Sabres. So we're just going to have to wait and see until the Devils get back to practicing, because at the time at this recording, they have the off day. So we don't really have a full gauge as to what could possibly happen. But once again, just getting the main centerpieces back, Jack Hughes and also Nico Hischier. So Jack, I like to call him the franchise piece. Nico's obviously the captain. He's the leader, and he's a big glue piece of keeping this offensive and defensive dynamic together, because not only is Nico great offensively, but he is glorified defensively as well. He is regarded as one of the best two-way players in the game. And Lindy said, like, when you have Nico on the rink, you don't have to play your two best defensemen, because Nico can do a boatload of the defensive work in order to help the Devils win. And that's what we saw in the game against the Sabres. Now, the key is, can they build off that momentum? But once they get the team fully healthy, I think we're going to see shades of what the Devils were able to do last year. Obviously, teams are scouting them much better. Devils are no longer the underdog team. Teams and players are gunning for them, so they definitely have to keep their head on a swivel. But once again, it's still very tight in the Metro. I think with the exception of the New York Rangers, who are right now running away with it in the Metro for the time being, the rest of the positioning, it's still up for grabs for anybody, whoever gets on that hot streak or whoever gets on that cold streak. And obviously, Gil, you know this, around American Thanksgiving time, that's when we start to separate the contenders from the pretenders. And that's where we start to see the standings just start to settle in just a little bit. Still too early, but still you start to see where teams are at in terms of their overall development.
Talk to me about goaltending and team defense. They have been issues for this team. Obviously, getting healthy will help, but what do you see with that? And can the team get more consistent in those areas?
Well, they're starting to improve defensively just a little bit. I don't want to jump the gun on anything, but I think actually moving Brendan Smith from a defensive role to now being a forward, like he was a fourth line winger and he has experience of doing so. He did that with the Rangers at one point. I think that actually helps the Devils defensively, because you could put Colin Miller alongside with Luke Hughes, and it seems like Miller is really helping Luke Hughes thrive a little bit more. Dougie Hamilton, he's all offense, no defense, so that's something that has to get figured out a little bit, because this season for New Jersey, they've given up a lot of odd man rush situations. They've given up a lot of open breakaways. Seems they have poor communication, which leads to defensive lapses, which results in the team scrambling, and it leaves lanes wide open for their opposition. So they definitely got to tighten up a little bit. But I think this game against the Sabres, especially with getting one of your better two-way players back in Nico, I think that's going to help them in more ways than one. Obviously, I don't want to put the big burden on Hischier's shoulders, but he definitely is one of the top players in the NHL for a reason. And I think he has no problem with doing whatever it takes to help his team win. So I think the defense is starting to improve a little bit more, and we'll see what happens. But obviously, Dougie Hamilton, he's been a little bit of a big concern, but he can usually make up for it on the offensive side of things, because I think he's like the only defenseman on this Devils roster who has more than just like 2 goals in terms of the Devils blue liners. And then for goaltending, that's a big question mark. I think the Devils are definitely going to have to try to make a move for another NHL caliber goalie, because Vitek Vanecek, he hasn't been his sharpest this season. And yes, I know that the Devils just won in dominating fashion, but here's the thing. He only faced 12 shots and he still gave up 2 goals, albeit they were power play goals, but still, that's something you need to take into consideration. Akira Schmid, he had a very good outing in the game against the Blue Jackets. Obviously, he didn't really get that much help in front of him, particularly with Dougie Hamilton once again. But I think the Devils, they need to search for another goalie come the trade deadline. Right now, the market is very, very thin. You could look at someone like John Gibson over in Anaheim, or maybe I've been hearing a few things saying like maybe we could possibly see a Mackenzie Blackwood reunion from the Sharks. That's desperate times call for desperate measures. I know his tenure with the Devils wasn't really all that memorable. It was filled with injury-plagued years and disappointment. But once again, Blackwood has been one of the few shining graces for the San Jose Sharks. So I don't think you can really take that out of the equation. Do I think it's going to happen? Most likely not, but that's something you could consider. So the point I'm just trying to make is that the Devils, they need to look for another NHL caliber goalie and maybe send down Akira Schmid to let him marinate a little longer in the AHL, because the thing is, Schmid could still be sent down to the AHL with no repercussions. But the thing is like, aside from Schmid and Vanacek, who's behind him? So you got Keith Kincaid, he's in the AHL right now. You got Eric Shalgren, he's in the AHL right now. He hasn't really been all that sharp. So it's just like you have those question marks a little bit, but it's something that Tom Fitzgerald is going to have to figure out, and I'm sure some tough decisions are going to have to be made. But the point is, with Vitek Vanacek and Akira Schmid being the two goalies for the Devils, I don't know if that's a recipe for a Stanley Cup. And obviously, like I said, the market is a little thin for a goalie, but I'm sure Tom Fitzgerald will try to figure something out.
All right, Trey, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
You can find Locked On Devils on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. You can find me on the X app at TreyMac4 and the show's personal X page app at Locked On Devils. And check back for all the up-to-date news surrounding the Brick City's, New Jersey's Devils.
All right, Trey, thank you so much.
Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. A big new NHL season brings all sorts of possibilities. A player on your favorite team could score 50 goals. Your team could hoist the Stanley Cup, and you can win big playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like McDavid, Ovechkin, McKinnon, Crosby, or Sorokin will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in any given game. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, NHL fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.